What would happen if a revolution failed, yet became the perfect blueprint for the greatest revolution of the 20th century? This is not a hypothetical question. This is the very real story of Russia in 1905. A year when protests, strikes, and human blood merged with the white snow. A year when the Tsar still sat on the throne, the Russian Empire still existed on the world map, but faith in the old order had fractured beyond repair. And from those very ashes, inside the minds of the Bolsheviks, an obsessive question began to take shape. Not should we rise up again, but how will we avoid repeating this mistake next time? To understand why that question mattered so deeply, we must return to Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. It was a vast empire, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, possessing resources, population, and armed forces among the largest in the world. Yet behind that magnificent appearance was a society operating as if trapped in the past. Tsar Nicholas II held absolute power. No genuine constitution. No freedom of the press. No political rights for the vast majority of the population. One man, one dynasty, standing above all. In industrial cities, workers labored 12 to 14 hours a day under brutal conditions, low wages, and frequent workplace accidents. In the countryside, tens of millions of peasants lived in chronic poverty, still burdened by land debts dating back to serfdom. And the intelligentsia, those who began questioning Russia's future, were censored, surveilled, and repressed. Discontent simmered everywhere, but no flame was yet strong enough to burn the entire system down. Until the Russo-Japanese War broke out in 1904. It was supposed to be a short war, a display of Imperial Russian strength against a newly modernized Asian nation. Instead, it ended in catastrophe. Russia was defeated humiliatingly. The navy was destroyed. The army disintegrated. The Tsar's prestige collapsed before the eyes of the people. And as faith in state power evaporated, questions about the regime's legitimacy began to surface. On January 9, 1905, according to the old Russian calendar, a massive crowd marched toward the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. More than 100,000 workers, led by Father Georgy Gapon, carried banners, religious icons, and a peaceful petition addressed to the Tsar. They carried no weapons. They shouted no calls for overthrow. They believed the Tsar was their father, that if he knew their suffering, he would come to their aid. But the Tsar did not appear. Instead, there was the army. Gunfire echoed through the frozen winter air. Bullets were fired directly into the unarmed crowd. Bodies fell onto the snow, blood-staining streets once familiar with ordinary daily life. Hundreds were killed within hours. That day entered history as Bloody Sunday. And along with the bodies lying in the streets of St. Petersburg, an illusion died as well. The illusion that the Tsar was a protector. The illusion that this regime could be reformed through petitions. From that moment on, for millions of Russians, the Tsar was no longer a father. He became an enemy. Russia rapidly descended into chaos. Strikes spread at an unprecedented pace. Within months, more than 2 million workers across the empire stopped working. Peasants rose up, burning landlords' estates. Mutinies erupted within the army and navy. Most famous was the uprising aboard the battleship Potemkin, a symbol of fractures within the regime's own armed forces. Amid that revolutionary storm, a completely new concept emerged in Russian political life: the Soviet Workers' Representative Councils. In St. Petersburg, the Soviet quickly became a genuine center of power, coordinating strikes, issuing orders, and directly challenging the Tsarist government. For the first time in Russian history, a form of parallel authority existed, based not on bloodline or divine right, but on representation of the working masses. The head of the St. Petersburg Soviet at the time was a very young man who would later shake the world, Leon Trotsky. As the wave of unrest continued to spread, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to make concessions. In October 1905, he issued the October Manifesto, promising civil liberties, a constitution, and the creation of the Duma, the Russian parliament. Many believed victory had arrived. That autocratic rule had been compelled to retreat. That Russia was entering a new era. But history is rarely so simple. Those concessions were not surrender, but a highly sophisticated political counterattack. The Tsarist regime used promises of reform to divide the opposition, pacify the middle class, and isolate revolutionary forces. When the movement weakened, loyal troops were unleashed. The St. Petersburg Soviet was dissolved. Its leaders were arrested, exiled, or forced to flee abroad. The revolution of 1905 came to an end. The Tsar remained in power. The old order was restored. On the surface, it was a failure. But for Lenin, Trotsky, and the Bolsheviks, 1905 was far from meaningless. Lenin called it the Great Rehearsal for 1917. From that failure, they drew vital lessons. That concessions from the old regime could not be trusted. That a successful revolution required a tightly organized party with iron discipline. That control over the military, the media, and key centers of power was essential. And more importantly, they understood that the Soviets were not merely tools of struggle, but the future form of power itself. 12 years later, as Russia collapsed under the weight of World War I, as the army disintegrated and the economy imploded, the script of 1905 was performed once again. But this time, the Bolsheviks were prepared. And the Tsar had no escape. History does not repeat itself exactly. But it remembers the lessons paid for in blood.